Okay, guys. So, here we go. Custom cards this last month. There's gonna be a lot of chip memes, I'm guessing. Oh, guys, it's Chap. In the advent of a landmark being summoned, be a good lad and grant me +2/+2 if you please. That's actually vaguely humorous. Like, a lot of you guys are cringing, but this is actually above average. This is like, I can at least sort of smile at this. Listen, when we get to fucking cringe, you'll see cringe, okay? Lightning Rod. 1 mana, PNZ fast, deal 1 to an enemy. If it's already being targeted, deal 4 instead. This is a cute idea. It's completely broken. But again, I mean, when we're looking at custom cards, we're talking about concepts and not power level. Obviously, some aspects of this card would have to change. Deal 1 to an enemy. Is that implying that I can damage Nexus? How does like Nexus targeting work? Do you say anything? Enemy is not Nexus, right? Anything would have to be Nexus. Yeah, so the ability to deal 1 at fast speed, if it's okay. If it can't target Nexus, then it's definitely not as broken. Yeah, this is pretty cute. The question is, like, it might get a little bit confusing in terms of stack resolution order, right? Like, do you to trigger this effect, if you're casting 2 spells at the same time, do you put this on the stack first so that it resolves second, or do you put it second so that it resolves first? It's a little unclear. I can read this and it's possible that it works in either way. I mean, apart from that, which isn't really a major issue. It's a cool concept. You put this second so that it resolves first. Yeah, that's what I would guess. I mean, I think this is a pretty cool card. I'm glad that people are, you know, not just being like, oh, Flock is stupid and it's so good. I'm down for this number being 3 instead of 4 or something. I think that this is a pretty cute card. I don't think it's nearly as strong as it looks, for the same reason that Flock isn't nearly as strong as it looks. When I said it looked broken, it's because I literally thought this could target Nexus, because I think enemy used to mean Nexus, but then they changed it a long time ago. I actually don't think this would be that broken. I mean, it might be 3 instead of 4, but it's sort of similar to Ravenous Flock. It's in a far better region than Flock, so that's the big thing. So Flock is a card, I mean, I want to talk about Flock a bit, because people still kind of like don't really understand Flock. I think Flock is one of the better designed cards in the game. I'm not going to call it one of the best designed cards in the game, but Flock is a very well designed card that is able to basically single-handedly enable an entire archetype, which is really, really cool. A lot of people still look at Flock and they're like, hey, it's a 1 mana deal 4, nerf it, which is pretty dumb. I mean, for the most part, Flock is a very niche card. It's really easy to look at it as a 1 mana deal 4, but the limitation of having to target a damaged or stunned unit is actually like a really, really major limitation that makes it, yeah, I mean, it's a strong card, but it's hardly imbalanced, and it spawns an entire archetype of like Noxus control that basically couldn't exist without it. And Flock takes 2 actions, of course. I think that Lightning Rod would have sort of like similar implications, which is that it kind of looks nuts at first, but the fact that to be able to turn this, so it'll be a Blade's Edge in most hands, and Blade's Edge is fine as a card. It's gone slightly underrated in the past, and it's in a better region for it. You know, PNZ can definitely use this effect, but the fact that to be able to get the deal 4, you have to commit 2 spells at once, and then, you know, one of the spells has to go on something that you're trying to deal 4 to, is gonna end up being really awkward, right? Like, most of the time this will just be a 1 deal 1, and to be able to get the deal 4, you have to sort of overcommit resources in the same way that probably in this case even in more of a way that you probably have to commit resources for Flock, right? When you've already damaged their unit or you've already stunned their unit, you get less value from killing it. Obviously this is compensated by the fact that it's a 1 mana deal 4, but it balances out, right? And a card like this, like when you actually run through the games in your head, like this would have pretty interesting implications. You could do some cute PNZ combos with this, but I don't actually think this would lead to like really consistent blowouts. There would be a lot of situations where, you know, you'd have to like chain things for it to get any value at all, and there's not really like what's the most common way to target something on the stack in a non-committal way where this can deal 4 without it being an overkill. You'd basically have to use like Static Shock and Lightning Rod in the same action, pre-committing 2 spells at once, right? And they'd have to have basically 5 health for that to even really feel worth it. Yeah, if it's already being targeted, deal 4 instead. So if you just like can use this to counter Glimpse, then that's probably a bit too much. Yeah, that's probably true. Or like single combat. Yeah. So if for this ability to be able to work on like opponent spells with like Glimpse or single combat, that is probably a little too much. That's for sure. That's the entire point. I honestly kind of missed that point. I'm now seeing that it looks like this is the point of this card, is that it's supposed to like hard counter Glimpse in single combat, which, yeah, don't get me wrong, that's a little too much for sure. I think this is a pretty interesting card if it's just meant to work on your own. Like when I initially read this, I thought it was just kind of like trying to chain to your own spells. But I think if they kept it basically as like just working off of your own spells as like a chain or combo card, as opposed to trying to like hard smash single or Glimpse, then it would be pretty interesting. This is sort of disappointing. I was ready to say that this was like my favorite designed card that I've seen in a long time. It was really cool, but they do have to change that little wording. But that's fine. I mean, it's just a tweak. Again, custom cards are all about just like ideas and concepts. I think this is a really cool concept to give in that tweak. Like, I'm really down for more of this kind of thing. It adds a lot of... I like the idea of these sorts of combo cards that you have to like commit with both of your spells at the same time. Like, I have to target with my spell to be able to chain this, right? That's a really cool idea. What was that card in Yu-Gi-Oh called? The fucking chain burn card. Some of you guys know what I'm talking about. But like shit like that. I don't know if any of you experienced that card. Chain Strike? Was it Chain Strike? All right, so for those of you guys who don't know Chain Strike, for those of you guys who didn't play Yu-Gi-Oh, this is a really interesting concept, and I'm sure Yu-Gi-Oh has done sort of like similar things. But basically, the spell just says if you use it on a big chain, you deal damage proportional to the amount of like the depth it is on the chain, right? Like if you use it on a big stack, right? This card's on the ban list. Oh yes. Oh, absolutely. This card's crazy. So like if you use it on a big stack, it just does a ridiculous amount of damage for no reason. But the concept of this card being like, you know, a sort of like a chain card is really cool. It's like Storm. Oh yeah, no, yeah, Storm would be a better example. Sorry, my mind defaults to Yu-Gi-Oh examples because I played more of Yu-Gi-Oh than MTG. But yeah, no, I mean, Storm would be a good way to explain it to most of you guys. I think it's actually really important to make cards that are sort of like pre-committal be very powerful. I want to talk about that actually. Like this is an important aspect of this card. So again, ignore the fact that this can just like hard counter Glimpse and single and Fervor for no reason. Just like imagine this as a chain card. Like the fact that you have to pre-commit 2 spells at once is an insane downside that I think a lot of people are gonna underrate. Like that's why this has to be a 1 deal 4 that isn't bricked by its condition. So it's like it's a Blade's Edge at worst, which is pre-committing in Runeterra is basically like the weakest thing you can do, right? You don't want to start a stack with 2 spells at once. Not reacting to the opponent and chaining with your own cards is an extremely vulnerable position to be. As Runeterra at a competitive level is all about, I play 1 card to develop pressure, you play 1 card to stop the pressure, I play my card. You're sort of alternating a flow of cards in a general sense, right? You're trying to not overcommit your cards so that you have a re-response, but you're playing enough pressure to force an opponent's initial response, right? That's kind of how Runeterra works. There's a lot of cards in Runeterra that look really, really good until you realize you have to pre-commit and tap out, and that's really bad. And a really good example of that is Taric. When Taric got revealed, he looked like an almost decent card, and he's even gotten buffed since then. But the problem with Taric is just such a ridiculously fatal flaw, which is that you have to pre-commit your spells into every combat. You have to cast while you're submitting an attack. Think of an attack token like a spell, It basically is. When you're thinking about reactivity and when you're thinking about passing and when you're thinking about the stack, the attack token is a free 0 mana spell you're getting every turn that forces a potential opponent reaction, right? And just like how using Taric is, like, Taric is a much weaker card than it initially seems because it forces you to chain your own manual spell to that attack token spell, which is a horrible idea. And like, concepts like this would be a lot weaker than they initially seem for the same reason. Like, the logic of Runeterra is just so against chaining your own things together and not holding reaction to the opponent. So I really like that this is a deal 4. Like, I think it's actually important that this is a deal 4. This card would be much weaker than it looked if it didn't if it didn't work on opponents' targets. Quicksilver Sash, 3 mana burst, remove all debuffs and negative keywords from an ally and grant it +0/+2. Negative keywords, huh? So it removes ephemeral too? What are other negative keywords? I mean, that theoretically would apply to keywords like can't attack or can't block. So you could use this on a monkey idol and your monkey idol would be able to attack. I guess. But it's pretty obvious that this was designed to be a counter to Hush, basically. That this is just like the anti-Hush. You remove all debuffs and give it +2 health. Frostbite as well. Yeah, it's anti-frostbite. It's a pretty cool design. I don't really see any inherent problems with this. I mean, it looks like it could be a little broken. And this is a hard effect to make 4 mana. I guess I could see removing the grant health. Anti-freeze. Yeah. I mean, there's gonna be weird. This is, wow, God. So this is the thing about custom cards, and I know some of you guys are just like, oh, Swim, just move on. But like, why I love looking at custom card subreddit. Most of the cards you read once and you just don't think about again. But some of the designs actually really make you think for like a while. Like, this is a really cool card, and it would be interesting to see this kind of effect being translated into the game. It does the same thing as Quicksilver Sash in League. Very strong at Darkwater Scourge. Yeah, so, I mean, theoretically, you could double float into literally Darkwater Scourge this on turn 3 and have a 5/7 lifesteal. That's pretty funny. It's pretty easy to make this not remove ephemeral. Regions matter. Oh yeah, no, region matters a lot. But the fact that this is just kind of a nice counter to Hush, it's a nice counter to Frostbite, without being super bricked. I don't see anything about this that looks inherently imbalanced, honestly. Like, this looks pretty cool. The only question is, and here's the interesting question. So I think Runeterra does need a little bit more protection. I think that's kind of an important design element in Runeterra, because Runeterra is a game that's inherently extremely reactive. And having more tools that allow protection from the opponent's reactive game plan would be nice, and I think would balance out a lot of like the problems that we see in some of these metas where like the only decks are the ones that are able to achieve that uninteractability. The only question is it better to design protection cards in the form of Bastion, which is to say you pre-commit the protection, or like this where you commit the protection after they've played the Hush or the Frostbite? It's a really interesting puzzle. I'm not sure which one I like better. I mean, I'm fine with both being options in the game, I guess. And of course, Spell Shield has a lot of other implications, like it can block stuff like Vengeance, whereas, you know, this can't. This is why Shurima feels so bad. It's 90% proactive. Yes. Reactive tools are basically just king in Runeterra. Is that true? I think that's not like exactly what I've been saying, but pretty much. Like, it's a big problem with Scrying Sands. Like, Scrying Sands is supposed to be a powerful combat trick, but Predict is such a proactive concept. It's just getting so awkward with like the reactive nature of what things want to be. Yeah, I think I agree. That's a big problem with Predict in general. Predict is inherently very proactive, the way these cards are designed. Even Noxus is reactive. Yeah, you're right. Even Noxus is literally more reactive than Shurima. It's important to have these like strong, powerful spells. If they print Ishtal, one of the problems is like they could not print a powerful spell, whatever the 10th region is, right? Like you need a powerful spell or two to actually like carry the region. So I really, really like this design. Super cool. Rider Poro records the strengths of its fallen comrades. All right, so it's a 2-mana 1/4 Poro. Whenever another allied Poro dies, grant me +1 and its keywords. Poros have a lot of problems going on. I don't know if they want Poros to make sense, but I think that this is basically, I don't know. I think this is actually pretty good design. I mean, they might, you know, you might want to make it like have less than 4 health, I guess, if you really wanted. But it's a pretty cool card if it's with like Poro snacks. If you wanted something that, you know, could be used as a interesting factor to balance this card, if you wanted, you could make this in a different region. That's a good way to balance a card like this if you want to limit its abilities, because of course Freljord is kind of like the Poro's core region, and giving this card to Freljord, I guess, keeps that like flexibility of deck building, which is really important. So, you know, I could see this. Art is cute, but it doesn't really match the mechanics for the card. Yeah. And that's pretty important. I mean, it's supposed to be, it records the strength of its fallen comrades, but yeah, I mean, that's pretty tenuous. I agree with that, though, Vegatus. 100%. It's cute. I think something like this can be quite fun. I think a lot of people do like the sort of like heavy keyword game plan, and I do think that's gone a little bit underutilized. Like right now there's Victor and there's Heart of the Fluffed. I think that the just like, you know, stacking keywords sort of play pattern is actually pretty fun and surprisingly balanced. I think that like when you look at the variance on a card like Victor, it's a lot lower than it immediately seems. But yeah, I like this kind of thing. Celebrating Poro. 3 mana 2/2. When you summon a Poro, grant its keywords to all allies. So this is another basically, you know, keyword thing. And this is, it looks like it's based off of Adaptatron. It's basically what if Poros had their Adaptatron, sort of. This is probably a little nuts. But it's interesting. I mean, the Poro deck building cost is pretty major, so I don't know if this would be able to hit actual decks. Zoe, yeah, it's basically, I mean, it's sort of like a leveled Zoe, except it has a big deck building cost of Poros. And the most important thing is that when you compare it to the other one, there's a really, really important aspect of both design as well as deck building here. And this is something that I mentioned before, that like this card looks like much more nutty than the other one, but the other Poro, the Rider Poro, the big design difference is that this one's in Freljord, right? Like, this is already in region, so you have access to P and Z if you want that to be your second region for Poros, but you're also flexible to anything you want. Whereas the fact that this one is in Targon is a major balancing factor for this card, right? Like, you don't have the flexibility of being able to run other regions, and that's a big deal. Like, I can't overstate how big of a deal that is. Now, the fact that, you know, you can just give everything spell shields at burst resolve speed for 1 mana with Porofly, yeah, I mean, there's definitely interactions like that that are going to be pretty spooky. But I mean, you can't really run this card outside of a dedicated Poro deck, I think. And I don't know how well a dedicated Poro deck would even be able to use this card, honestly. I don't know. I don't think this card is actually, like, overpowered. It looks really crazy. But the fact that it's limited to Poros means that it's not really having like a major, you know, limit on design space. The fact that it's in Targon, like maybe I'm wrong, but this really doesn't seem like it would be anything really broken. Targon makes it pretty limited. Yeah. Targon is one of the ways to make it, like, to take a concept like this and make something kind of crazy, but limit it to a region that this archetype doesn't want to be in on its own, right? So there's just different kinds of Poros. I think I like the other one better just because it sort of empowers Poros more as an archetype. And I think it's more fun just having like one stacked keyword thing. But yeah, I mean, I think this is perfectly fine design. I think that at like a 3 mana 2/2, this is actually super fair for what it's doing. It's not doing anything crazy. And it's like, you know, it's limited. It's not like a 1 mana 1/1 Poro. Like, again, cards are, so the most important aspect of card design is like the region and the region deck building cost, right? The fact that this card is in Targon is a really, 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 really important design decision, because it means if you want to be in a Poro deck like Freljord, you can't run PNZ. If you want to be in an elusive deck, you can't run, you're locked into a Freljord, if you want to make this an elusive OTK with the elusive Poros, you pretty much have to run PNZ plus Targon. The thing about PNZ plus Targon, trying to make an elusive strategy out of this, is that it's pretty unnecessary because these regions don't really have good units to actually pick up the elusive keyword. You're not really getting much else, right? And a 3 mana 2/2, I think, sets you a lot further behind than it seems. Like a 3-mana 2/2 is basically a literally useless stat line. A lot of what you're paying for is the Poro tag, which you're not using outside of Freljord Vi. Yeah, I mean, you can get an elusive Vi, but I mean, at that point, you'd literally be better off running map, right? Like, the thing is, if you want to make an elusive deck with Targon and PNZ, if you think about what those colors have and like how those decks work, Targon already has some decent elusives. You don't really need to be giving the elusive keyword to allies. This is a very limited card. Like, I think the design of this card is really important because there's a lot of cards that sort of look like they're crazy scalable and crazy powerful until you actually like look at the region and look at the color pie and think about how they're actually going to impact deck building. If this card was in PNZ or if this card was in Freljord, it certainly could be a lot more broken. But the fact that it's in Targon is kind of what enables it to have this like crazy wacky ability without it being broken. Like this, I don't think there's anything really, you know, super strong here. It also sort of like, I think it fits somewhat in flavor. I mean, it does have a sort of Zoe kind of ability and it's in Targon. I think this is a really good design. Like this is a really cool card. I think this card is meme garbage level, not even remotely decent. Yeah, I would agree. If we're just looking at these numbers on this iteration of this card, like I don't think this is a strong card, but it doesn't need to be. It's still good design. It's a, you know, it's a cute Poro thing that will lead to some, you know, adorable meme decks. That's kind of all Poros have to be. Like, great design. Easiest upvote of my life. Oh, it's Evelyn, everyone's favorite. I saw a picture of old Evelyn, how she used to look before her rework. This champ looked quite different apparently. All right, so Evelyn is vulnerable. She's an elusive vulnerable Shadow Isles. Level up, I've been challenged, then deal 1 to all enemies in the Nexus. This is very interesting. So you can always challenge Evelyn, and once she gets challenged, she immediately levels up. So you can't challenge her with a 1 health unit because it won't survive her level up, I guess. This would probably have to go on the stack. This deal 1 damage to all enemies in the Nexus. When I'm challenged, deal 2 to all enemies in the Nexus. All right, so I guess her champ spell is gonna force things to challenge her. Like the her seduction skills in League. What are they called? Remove an ally from combat to deal 1 damage to all enemies. Wait, that's not the champ spell I was expecting. Ew. I mean, I guess it protects your Evelyn when she gets challenged. If you bait them into a challenge and then use this. And then a LoR, grant an ally vulnerable and lifesteal. Wait, so she doesn't have anything that forces the enemy to challenge her Evelyn? What? I thought that was the entire point. I thought the charm was gonna be like, oh yes, attack into me and then I level up. That was gonna make so much sense. That was literally, I was gonna say, wow, this is really cool design. She's a 4 attack elusive, so you kind of have to. Yeah, I mean, maybe. She's a 2 health elusive though, so you kind of just like Mystic Shot her. Dies to Mystic Shot. Never see play. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe that's enough even without charm. Just like, they will have to challenge into her. This is kind of interesting. So, the problem that, you know, some champions like this are maybe going to have is that basically it's color pie. So, Evelyn in Runeterra is kind of going to have to be a Shadow Isles card, I guess. Unless they really just, you know, don't care about region. Because she is Shadow Isles in League of Legends, right? That's one that's kind of like more definitively true. I mean, they might be able to put her somewhere else. But she is a Shadow Isles card. Like her KDA spell is in Shadow Isles. Does that matter? I don't know. She's regionless. Oh, why did I think she was Shadow Isles? Okay, I was just misinformed. Maybe it was because her KDA spell is Shadow Isles. Do the KDA spell regions have any relation at all? I'm pretty sure they don't. Ari Freljord? Yeah, exactly. Ari's not from Freljord. So the thing is, in Runeterra, I would be pretty surprised if they wanted to print an Evelyn that worked like this in Shadow Isles. Specifically, like, you know, color pie is pretty important for the most part, and I would be a little surprised if, you know, this kind of idea of, like, Shadow Isles doesn't really have elusives, and they pretty intentionally don't have elusives. Like, their thing is kind of supposed to be fearsome instead, I guess. Champions don't follow the theme. I guess they can be a little bit more outside of color pie. I mean, this is a card that doesn't really fit the color pie of most things, right? This is like Bilgewater is the closest thing this fits because it's elusive, it has vulnerable, and it does like these splash pings. If you're just looking at like the words in the text, obviously I'm not saying Evelyn is a pirate, but just mechanically. And that's kind of the only problem with a card like this. If you're just looking at it from a mechanical level, I mean, it's kind of interesting. I do like this weird level up minigame. Like I said, I'm a little disappointed that the charm doesn't force her level up, but honestly, it's still cool without it. It's arguably more cool without it, because like, yeah, you put pressure on the opponent, you sort of bait them or force them into attacking her, even though you know it'll level her up. And then, you know, she might have a trick to be able to keep her alive even through your challenge. Like, it's cool design. It creates this interesting minigame that both players have to be kind of thinking about, while doing it in a really simple way, right? It's not like overcomplicated, but it's just something that you have to be aware of. Pretty cool. I do like this design. It's a really cool concept, and it does fit the Evelyn theme of, you know, the seductress, just the way I like them, big and stupid. Sump Dump. Create in hand a fleeting copy of each card I've seen you discard on countdown 3. So you basically have 3 turns for it to track your discards, and it creates a fleeting copy. So if you play this on 2 turns, on turn 5, it'll create a fleeting copy of every card that you've discarded on turn 3 and 4. It's basically just turn 3 and 4. It's interesting. I don't know if this will lead to any like decks, or if this will really see play on its own. This is so much OP. That looks so good. What? Guys, this card is so fleeting is a really big downside, and it's only tracking 2 turns to be able to clone up, and it's only creating fleeting copies of cards that you've discarded and not copies of cards that you've played, right? So you're not able to really double up on value for, you know, synergy cards like Kyrian. There's a lot of limiting factors here. The only thing that this card would be good for is, yeah, I mean, it can give you fodder for Rummage, but it does so in a really slow and clunky way. Like, the countdown 3 for payoff is really slow. I think this card is interesting. Like, I wouldn't hate it if this was in the game, because it's at least doing something kind of new. But on a viability scale, it definitely would fall pretty short. The countdown 3, I think people really need to realize how big of a downside this timer is, right? Like, spending mana and spending a commitment early and then just getting value 2 or 3 turns from now is really, really awkward. And like, you know, we can see that in a lot of the landmarks that are currently in the game, right? Because like an easy example would be, I don't know, something like the spiral stairs, for example, is just countdown 3. And of course, the one exception is like Frozen Thrall, which is, you know, the fact that you can like cheat out an 8/8 overwhelm on turn 5 is an exception. But for the most part, these sorts of like, I'm going to give you value in 2 or 3 turns, you know, and just wait for me to give you that value is really awkward. Because spending your mana earlier is worth so much more than mana later. It's there's a significant mana. What's the word? I'm blanking out here. What's the word for inflation? That's the word. Yeah, the mana is in inflation. Basically, like, mana over time is worth so much less, right? Like, mana on turn, like 1 mana on turn 1 will deal a lot of damage to the opponent over the course of spending that 1 mana investment on turn 1. If you spend like 3 mana to play Spiral Stairs on turn 3, and then you get that 3 mana back worth of Seed of Strength on turn 6, which is it's already terrible. Like, you would much rather spend the 3 mana on turn 6 than the turn 3. Like, mana earlier is worth much more than mana later. So the fact that this can draw you some cards isn't really, like, by saying that, I'm gonna say that I think this card, if it's countdown 3, it could easily be 1 mana. And I know some of you guys are going to call me crazy for saying that, because I know a lot of you guys are just thinking in terms of mana, and you're like, 1 mana create some fleeting copies. That would be broken. But like, seriously, when it's countdown 3, it's a lot actually harder to use than it sounds. Much, much harder to use. Getting copies of cards you've discarded is only useful if you have like a very specific hand. Like, you need a Rummage to be able to rummage away the cards after Sump Dump. It would force you to rummage when you might not want to. And then you'd need basically a second Rummage or something to be able to get value out of like the fleeting copies of the cards you discarded, right? So it's an interesting effect. I'm never going to say no to like anything that's not just flat being added to the game. But I do prefer ones that have more ability to actually affect deck building and affect decks. Because a concept like this I don't think would ever really see play. Songs of Life and Death. A 3-region set. Oh, wow. What is this? This is crazy. Who's into Nami? She's half fish. Yeah, but she's the right half. So, let's check out these cards. Nami. 4 mana, 2/7. Targon. Heal an ally or your Nexus 5 when played. And you've healed 12 damage total. She levels up. She's got Attune and Spell Shield. So she's basically like a Brokeback Protector stat line with Spell Shield. Interesting, I guess. Okay. And when she levels up, your healing effects that target your Nexus also damage the enemy Nexus for the same amount. Nope. I don't think that's really a balanceable effect. I think that's a little too broken. That's fine and balanced, yep. This is, so, I mean, like I said, when we're talking about design, there's like design and then there's balance, right? The design's like the cake and the balance is like the frosting on top of the cake, right? When we're looking at custom cards, it's not about the balance, but it's about the balanceability. And it's the most important thing to understand is balance and balanceability are two completely different things, despite being 3 letters different, right? So, you know, when we look at a card and it's imbalanced, tweaking the numbers might make sense. This is an effect that might not be balanceable, in my opinion. Like, you could make Nami more removable. You could make this happen like the first time per turn. I don't know if that would really balance out this effect, right? Like, Star Shaping becomes a deal 5 at burst speed, which is silly. I don't think this is a balanceable effect, really. You could do a similar logic as to what I talked about in the Poros, which is like, you could put this kind of concept in a region without as much access to healing, and then the implication is you're supposed to use it with Targon, and that's a big deck building cost. Maybe, but I don't know. This looks pretty wacky. Imagine a burst speed decimate. You can literally double Star Shaping for 10 mana. Like, you can literally do 10 damage at burst speed. Nami would be in Bilgewater. Oh yeah, she's like an ocean lady. Why is she in Targon? Alright, Nami's Edge and Flow. Deal 3/2 unit to heal an ally and your Nexus 3. Whoever made this was looking at Resplendent Stellacorn, and they were like, man, wouldn't it be really cool if instead of this 5 mana card being a 4/5, we made this effect into a deal 3. I don't love it. I really think that, and this is something that I've talked about before, but I think champ spells are really important. Like, it feels so much better when you're playing a champ spell that has like reliable synergy with a champ being on board. I think that champ spells being bad is like, if you're looking at all the cards in the game and all the cards like being bricked out, like, obviously champions being bad is kind of the worst of any cards, because a lot of people are playing this game for the champions. People liked playing Zillion in League and want to be able to play Zillion in this game, right? And that matters. I'm not going to say the champ spells being bad matters as much as the champs being bad, but it's second in line. Like, when you play Zillion and you double draw Zillion and you get Chrono Shift, it's not just that it's a bad card, but it feels really clunky with like how your game plan works. Like, it feels like it's such an important thing for the champ spells to actually support the game plan. And so, like, when I look at Ebb and Flow, it's kind of an alright card, but as a champ spell, I really don't think it would support this Nami's game plan, which matters a lot. Mirai Invoker. 5/4/5, Nightfall, heal your Nexus 3, invoke a celestial spell. It's an interesting invoke pool. You're pooling for the spells. We haven't really seen that invoke pool before, and I hope we never do. Yup. Mirai Hunter. 3/1/5 Attune Challenger. I mean, it's an interesting stat line, I guess. It's kind of like Braum. Can we talk about that for a second? Braum is a really bad card, guys. I think there's not a lot of people that are even aware of how bad Braum is. Braum is like a hilariously bad card. He's literally a 4 mana Flame Chompers. I've never once seen, I've heard people say this. I've heard people use Braum and Stabilize in the same sentence. I've heard this a few times. People have said stuff like, I like playing my Braum to stabilize the board against aggression. I've been playing this game for a year and a half. I've never once seen Braum stabilize a board. What do you mean stabilize a board? He's literally a city breaker with regen. It's 2 bodies and 1 summon. It's 1 body the turn after. He has a deck with a 50% win rate since the patch. It's true. I can't talk shit about Braum. There's no way. Because Braum's on the list. So he has to be good. He's on the list. Look at that right here. Braum. All right, sorry, where were we? We were in the middle of something, but I saw this card and I got Braum flashbacks in my head. It sort of reminds me of Bubble Bear. I'm not really allowed to dislike Bubble Bear because apparently this card reminds a lot of people of me. I look forward to the day where they give away to like reverse attack and health, because every card game has one of those, like Sword and Shield from Yu-Gi-Oh, or like Crazed Alchemist from Hearthstone. When they give away to reverse attack and health, and like I can give Bubble Bear a +1/+1 and then smack them with my 7/1, I mean that'll be funny. Make him a 6/0? Yeah, true. Yeah, you're right, guys. I would just make him a 6/0 and he would die instantly. Yeah, I mean, keywords attached to these kinds of like, you know, these sorts of defensive stat lines end up being a little awkward. Mariah Singer, 2/1/4, ally attune effects completely refill your spell mana. I think this would be a lot worse than it seems. I don't think this would be that good. This looks really OP to a lot of people at first, for sure. And, you know, there might be some kinds of combos with this. It's in Targon, though. Yeah, and Targon doesn't really have access to attune. There's a lot of things about this that would make it not OP. I'm actually quite certain of this. Again, when we're evaluating cards, yeah, it's in Targon, so it's like we're saying, the idea of forcing you to be running attunes, which, you know, Targon doesn't really have a ton of access to attunes. Obviously, in this set, they're giving Targon some attunes. But, okay, I haven't looked at the rest of the set. I guess I have to look at them together. That's one aspect. 2 mana 1/4 is a really awkward stat line, as a lot of people have been made aware of in the last 3 weeks. 2 mana 1/4 is not a great stat line for a lot of reasons. It doesn't really stop a ton. And, you know, I mean, it's contingent on staying alive. Attune actually feels surprisingly awkward a lot of the time. Like, decks that are able to use spells for the spell mana aren't actually able to, like, they often need to be banking the mana to be able to leave the spells open, right? Like, if you've played, you know, a lot of attune cards in good decks like Zap, Sprayfin, and stuff like that, there's a lot of times where the attune will literally overflow your mana, right? And if you're imagining that, like, think how many times you play Zap, Sprayfin when you have 3 spell mana. Like, think how often this effect will even give you mana back, right? To be able to get value from playing this card, you have to get at least 2 mana back. And even then, it's spell mana instead of unit mana, which is less useful. This is a card that looks kind of strong, but ends up being much weaker. Mantle of Tides. I mean, it's an interesting effect. I'm not saying, as long as the effect is kind of like something we haven't really seen before, I'm down for a card being printed with it. Mantle of Tides. Grant an ally +1/+1 if they have a tune. Grant them +3/+2 instead. Huh. I mean, a 3 mana conditional grant them +3/+2 I think is fine. This card kind of works well with the attune keyword because it's giving them a buff, and it's allowing you to use the attune spell mana right away. That's pretty cute. I mean, it's a permanent buff if you're looking for that specifically. And this card in this set is designed to be comboed with some of the other things. So bad. I mean, so Runeterra doesn't really have a lot of permanent buffs. It's a permanent buff that works pretty early into the game on 3 mana, which means you can use this on turn 3. And if you use it on like Bubble Bear, that's actually really not bad. If you use it on something with a keyword, you can get a lot of value. It's meant to be combined with this card, Marai Hunter, that we just looked at. And like when you look at this curve, it's actually a little spooky. I mean, on turn 3, you can cheat out an effective Screeching Dragon. Literally, you like look, you're cheating out a Screeching Dragon. I mean, it's 2 cards, of course, but you're paying 5 mana because, you know, you attuned, and you're getting a 4/6 Challenger, which is on turn 3 is gonna have more value, right? That's the, you know, you're getting it 2 turns early. I don't know. I think this card is perfectly fine. I don't think this is like poorly designed or anything. There's a lot of attune cards, especially with the stat lines that are being printed in this set, right? Like, you know, if we're imagining this being used on this Nami card, she has a stat line that really wants a buff like that. Sure, you know, she's got Spell Shield and she can turn into a chonker. I mean, this card is totally fine. Like, makes sense with a lot of the other cards. Again, like when we're evaluating cards, it's all about just imagining the decks and the synergies and how they actually work together, right? It kind of might look weak on its surface value, but that's not really how we should be evaluating things. Mirai Starcaller. I do like this set overall, by the way. Like these are pretty high quality designs. I mean, obviously Nami I think is pretty ridiculous, but apart from that, is it Nami or Nami? It's probably Nami. 7, 6, 8. When I'm summoned to create 2 star shaping enhance. All right, fuck right off. Listen. These are good. These are high quality cards. Most of them are pretty well designed, but like this person is just a fucking Tarragon fan. Like this person, this is like, and I've talked to a lot of people. Nobody actually likes Tarragon. Like even Tarragon players don't like Tarragon. But this is like the one player. We found the one player who's just like an actual, just like jams Tarragon. Like they make a Nami set and it's not Bilgewater, it's Tarragon. And Nami just like makes the star shapings just end the Nexus. And you know, this thing is just invokes a celestial spell. Like, oh yes, I've needed that. You know, do I want fucking Equinox? Do I want, like, invoking a spell pool is so ridiculous. And then we've got this card. This, like, I wasn't gonna say anything, but like when you like look at this, when I'm summoned to create 2 star shaping and have fuck right off. Like, what the fuck? This is so stupid. When I'm summoned to activate all allied Nightfall effects, ignoring any targeted portions, which is the same clause as I think Cygnus has. I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but I kind of don't really like the attune keyword. Attune to me feels like a sort of useless keyword. I don't know. I mean, it does allow for a certain kind of flexibility. You can kind of call Zap like a 3-mana card that you play on turn 4, and you can kind of call, you know, TF. Like his blue card gives you the mana. I don't know. I don't hate it. It's fine. It does have some applications in the game. It's just like most of them have felt fairly useless. The fact that it's basically a way to balance Eye of the Dragon around being a 1-mana card that you can't play on turn 1. That's pretty much it. And Zap is a 4-mana card, a 3-mana card that you can't play on turn 3. It is kind of cool with Droplet. I'll admit that. I mean, obviously Droplet's kind of busted. Droplet's like the best kind of busted. Droplet's busted in like a pretty healthy way. I mean, obviously it's going to be funny because I'm saying that, and yeah, Azir Aurelia does happen to be running this card among many others, but Droplet is like a card, it's sort of like Ravenous Flock, where on its face it's completely broken, but it ends up justifying an entire archetype that can't really make sense without it. Like, recall effects are really I think, like, almost all of these recall effects are, I think, much worse than they even seem at first. And Droplet is single-handedly enables a lot of cool things. I like Droplet. This card is, like, straight up busted, but I think it's a well-positioned busted card. And that's a good thing. Like, being able to position your busted cards well is important. Hydroblast. If you behold an attune card, drain 3 from any unit. Yuck, it's slow speed. Can we stop with the slow speed spells? Ugh. Ugh. Support. Grant my supported ally +1/+1 and spell shield. This is interesting. I mean, it's a permanent spell shield, and it's an elusive 2-mana card. So this is pretty good. This is definitely less like, okay, I will say this card is less absolutely nuts than it looks, but this card is pretty nuts. Like, I'm not going to say this is one of the cards that looks nuts but isn't. This card is actually pretty nuts. Like, it's pretty nuts. Yeah, it's Young Witch with 1 extra health. Oh no, it's much better than Young Witch. Are you kidding me? That's totally busted. This is pretty totally busted. I'm not gonna be a fucking contrarian. Like, this card is actually just pretty nuts. By the way, I like Spell Shield as a keyword. I'm happy to have more ways of like stopping interaction. The biggest problem with Bastion in my mind was that it's in Targon. I think like I really wish Sarima had like more access to, you know, like valuable Spell Shield as kind of like one of their main identities. Because it seems like Shurima's identity is supposed to be like cheat out your champions and then protect them, but they don't really have a lot of tools for that are all, you know, on the level. Moonstone Ruins. When an ally with support blocks an enemy, give it 3 health. Is this a support expansion all of a sudden? It's just this one other card, right? But I guess it'll be the rest of these. This is a very interesting card. Basically, this card is designed for... So a lot of people have mentioned that the problem with the support archetype is you don't really have defense, because your support cards are only doing things on the attack turns, and they're kind of like useless on the defensive turns. And I guess this card is designed with that goal in mind, to be like, okay, let's give supports more of an ability to actually block. The problem with that is it's important to have a goal in your design, and like I like seeing that there's an actual point, but it's doing so in a kind of awkward way. The bigger things supports, it's a deliberate weakness though. Yeah, it's kind of a deliberate weakness. Soraka like this. Yeah, I mean, it's a give effect, it's not a grant, but that also doesn't matter that much, because when you're blocking, you're losing the health, so the health doesn't really usually matter if it's permanent or temporary. It's I don't know, I kind of hate landmarks in general. Landmarks are always going to have these kinds of problems. Like, this kind of design is always going to be, okay, if you draw it on turn 3 as a 1-of in a support deck, it might make sense. If you draw it as less or more than a 1-of, it's going to be terrible. If you draw it later than turn 3, it's going to be terrible. You guys know how I feel about landmarks. Ceremonial Mask. Grant an ally +1/+1 and my support effect activates twice. What the actual fuck? I mean, this is pretty unfair on Taric. Also, bizarrely enough, Taric can clone this card. So if you were to use this on Taric, he would get a permanent +1/+1. And then if you didn't have another spell, you could have another spell, but if you didn't, you would attack and the supported ally would get masked twice from the mask that you used on Taric, which is definitely a little too silly. Trevor Snoozebottom. Yeah, Trevor Snoozebottom would actually fucking love this card. I like cards that push the envelope. I like cards that have, you know, powerful abilities. I think like a support effect that activates twice could work. It might need to look pretty different. What might be a better way of doing that is a support that just simply said, I activate my supported unit's support ability. Like, that would be a cooler way to do it. If you wanted a way to double up on support abilities, if you wanted a way to do like a cool Trevor Snoozebottom double elusive value, you could have a small support card, a small support unit that just basically said, whatever I'm supporting, if I'm supporting a support, they use their ability twice. Sort of like Mountain Sojourners, but good. Yeah, I mean, Mountain Sojourners does it, but it gives stats. It doesn't do an interesting double up effect. So I do like things that are doing cool high synergy combo plays. Like, I will always look at cards like this and I like the fact that, you know, people are interested in more of these kinds of combo things. But the identity of attaching this to a spell that also gives a buff doesn't feel right. Like, if you were to do this, it'd have to be focus speed for sure. And honestly, this wouldn't really be broken outside of Taric. And you could argue that Taric isn't strong enough, so you could print something strong that only works with Taric, but this might be a little too much. Pocket Galaxy. If you behold a Celestial, move your highest cost card to the top of your deck. That's interesting. And of course, it draws one with Nightfall. It's an interesting tutor. So I'm a pretty big fan of this card. I think that tutors... I think Runeterra is a game that needs more tutors. I think... So for those of you guys who don't know, tutors mean a way to cheat out something from your deck into your hand or on the board. Just gaining access to your deck. Entry would be like a tutor. I think that Runeterra could use more ways of reliably getting what you want, because there's really not a lot in this game. And I'm super down for that. I do think that some of the best kinds of tutors that the tutors that I love the design of the most are ones that are able to sort of be flexible based on how you choose to build the deck, right? Like, this is the best kind of tutor in that you can have a lot of different things that you're cheating out with different deck building costs, right? Which is really cool, because you can, you know, if you want to build a weird deck around, God, I don't know, you know, this is a terrible example, but maybe like a Victor deck, who knows? Or like Lee Sin. Lee Sin is probably a better example. Okay, Lee Sin is a much better example. The idea of this kind of card that has, like, you know, a deck building cost where you're not able to use more expensive cards is pretty cool, right? I like these tutors that create these deck building puzzles. Zap Sprayfin currently does that, and Babbling Bjerg kind of sort of does that, but neither of them really does it well. I mean, in the case of Zap Sprayfin, the only puzzle is like, oh, in my Gohar deck, I'm not going to run Vile Feast. Like, that's pretty much it. It's really not very interesting, right? I really like the idea of a cheap, scalable tutor that has the ability to, you know, change the way we think about deck building. It's very cool. When looking at this card, in terms of how everything about the specifics work, I could see an argument for it being a little strong. I don't know. I mean, Lease Index would definitely run this as like a 1 of or a 2 of, right?
Basically 1/8 gay.
It's a great way to just cycle 1, and you can just spend 1 mana to cycle 1. Yeah, Lease Index would love running this as like a 2 of, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, Acel decks would be able to use this. I don't know if, don't get me wrong, I don't know if this kind of ability, this sort of tutor would make sense to be in Targon. I don't know if it would make sense. I don't think it honestly would make sense to be attached to Beholding a Celestial. So some of the specifics I'm not necessarily on board with. All right, what is this? Solari Herald. Daybreak, give me Overwhelm this round. A 3/5/3. With Daybreak, give me Overwhelm this round. This looks a little overtuned. Someone was looking at Crescent Guardian and they were like, man, what if Daybreak had their own Crescent Guardian? Daybreak is a lot easier to get off than Nightfall. Like very, very significantly easier. It's actually pushing it. I could see something pretty close to this just working fine. It only does give Overwhelm this round. If it was Daybreak, give me Overwhelm and +2 this round, and if its base was a 3/3, I might actually be fine with that. Like, it's not that far off, but yeah, no, I mean, the card is pretty good. It's not bad. Cosmic Gateway. Round start, if you have the attack token, invoke. Countdown 3, refill your spell mana. The next Celestial card you play costs 2 less. What? This is all over the place. Filthy Targon Lover. And this is just a bizarre card. I don't really know what this card is trying to do. Like, you'd be able to use Living Legends and stuff like that. I actually think that a lot of these designs are good. This is a pretty good set. Some of the power levels are definitely overtuned, and especially the like Star Shaping and Nami ones. But a lot of the concepts in this set, again, like when we're looking at custom cards, the most important thing is just, you know, looking at the ideas, and some of the ideas are really cool. Like, this is a lot of cool ideas here. Needs some tweaking. Just a little bit. This is a card. Your opponent starts a free attack with all their units. Draw 1. That's a very cool design. It's sort of like a pseudo challenger. Basically, like it forces. Basically, this card is trying to be a counter to like backline champions. It's supposed to be I mean, you know, if there's like TF or something in the meta, it's a way to sort of challenge it, I guess. Judgment combo. Forcing your opponent to attack is like challenging everything. It's interesting. Too cheap. Rally is 3. I mean, it's a lot more limited though. I do think it's definitely a little too cheap, for sure. It's cool design though. I think this kind of design is perfectly fine. It probably does have to fit with Demacia because of their flavor. I could see a concept like this kind of working in Noxus though. It's a really, really cool concept. It's like an Engard, sort of. It's very limited. Incredible idea, too powerful. Yeah, no, sure. I mean, 1 mana is too cheap. Sure, absolutely. And if you want, you can make it not have the draw 1. But we're just talking about the idea of a spell that's just like a reverse rally that forces the opponent to attack, which is cool. I mean, it solves some issues with the game. There will be a lot of situations where you wouldn't really be able to get as much value from using this. The design is great, but I don't think this card would be easy to balance. This card would not be like this card would be very swingy. There would be a lot of situations where this card bricks out. There are a lot of situations where, you know, if the opponent has stuff like elusives or stuff like quick attack or even like overwhelm, like a lot of attack keywords, you're not going to be able to get nearly the same value as if this was, you know, being able to challenge their units. This is how you win turn 1. Wait, true. Tellstones would allow us to win turn 1. Wait, you're right. Wait, I never thought about it like that. This is perfect. The turn 1 win. That's why it's 1 mana. It's polarized and swingy. So polarization is a really important thing to talk about, which is this idea of cards having swingy value. I've talked about polarization a lot. It's important to note that high degrees of polarization are some of the bigger problems that plague card games and Runeterra as a whole. Polarization just means a high range of value. In particular, a high range of value that doesn't really have much of a middle ground. So a card being polarized in terms of its value means that it's going to either be really bad or really good, depending on the situation. And for example, like rallies are pretty polarized cards in general. Like, you know, you have to build these decks in very specific ways, but rallies can either be completely useless or, you know, a lot like auto winning the game, right? A lot of cards currently are pretty polarized, and one of the problems with Runeterra right now is that a lot of matchups are polarized. So a lot of the game feels kind of sort of rock, paper, scissors-y. There's a lot of like 30-70 matchups, the most there's ever been in the game right now. Polarization is, in general speak, not really a good thing. I guess that's fair as a generalization. The more true generalization would probably be that on average games tend to be overpolarized more than underpolarized, which are sort of the same statement, but the second one is more clear. So yeah, don't get me wrong, you do want to rein in a little bit on that. It's important that your games feel a little bit closer and that cards aren't like, you know, either complete bricks or completely nuts. This is part of the reason, a large part of the reason, I personally don't really like landmarks. A lot of landmarks, the inherent design of landmarks is very polarized because most landmarks give you per turn value when you play them. You're going to either double draw them, they're going to be useless. You're going to draw them too late, they're going to be useless. You're not going to be able to get value out of a second one. And if you draw it early, it's going to be really good. You know, back when, for example, Grand Plaza was a +1/+1. It's a very, very swingy card. Here's the thing, though. Polarization, while it's very, very true that I think in general games tend to be overpolarized rather than underpolarized. Obviously, there exists some form of balance. It's not like you don't want swingy things to happen ever. It's important that they're reined in and they're applied to the right kinds of things, right? Like Tellstone's, this kind of concept, again, if it was balanced, if it costed more mana or something, it would be an interesting meta response to some sorts of things in a sort of similar way that Stony Suppressor is. I mean, Stony Suppressor is, again, a very polarized card. It's like a hard tech against a specific kind of deck. And we don't really have a lot of those in Runeterra, by the way. Runeterra has no actual, like, very, very few actual tech cards, right? In terms of, like, trying to counter specific decks or matchups, cards that, like, their role is to be that, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. But viewing this as a card that could be more like Stony Suppressor, where you'd maybe run it in a specific meta as a sort of way to counter certain kinds of decks. Like, you wouldn't be able to counter a lot of decks by doing this, right? Like, killing engines is really important, but there's a lot of limitations to what this card can do. Passage unearned too. Yeah, passage unearned too. So the thing to understand about polarization, yes, I talk negatively a lot about this idea of polarization in games, and a lot of the time it's very negative, but having some cards that have these sorts of swingy outcomes can absolutely be a fine thing as long as they're done in exactly the right way. In this case, I'm fine with it as long as it's kind of like more matchup specific, that you can maybe slide into some decks and some metas. Those are interesting, and we don't really have them in Runeterra. But also polarization can be important when it doesn't, you know, turn the entire game into like a specific check for Go Fish. I'm fine with like, there needs to be certain levels of swinginess that happens, right? And there's nothing really wrong with that. It's just, in this case, I think this is sort of a kind of polarized effect that is at least like contributing to the options in the game in a healthy way. So I'm pretty fine with this design personally. I'm mad this doesn't exist. Deck creation needs more love. 2 mana 0/4, round start, draw a created card from your deck. Deck creation needs more love. So what can this draw? Basically, this is a way to draw your counterfeit copies cards or your Victor lasers. Because the goal of this card is to create cards in your deck and then tutor them out. It can draw stuff like Yetis, I guess. So I think this is a really cool mechanic to have in the game. Time bombs. Yeah, drawing time bombs. I think this is a really cool mechanic to have in the game. I absolutely support the idea of a soft tutor that says, draw a created card from your deck. It's a very, very cool concept. You can use it with a lot of things. You can use it, like, you can meme with it. You can use it with treasures. You can use it with messengers. Like, it makes counterfeit copies suddenly make a bit more sense. It's pretty cute with Go Hard, right? So I'm very down for the idea of draw a created card from your deck. However, it might have to be like a single play effect as opposed to like every single turn. When you attach this kind of thing to a round start, that's probably a little too crazy. Unfortunately, especially with, you know, the powerful things like a Go Hard. I don't think this could be attached to like an every turn effect, but, or, you know, I guess it could be an attack effect if they really wanted it to. It would more likely make most sense as like a cheap play effect or a spell that does that. But again, that's the specifics. The implementation aside, you know, it's not about everything else, but the idea of draw a created card from your deck is really, really cool. That personally, I think is pretty amazing. I mean, the trickiest part to balancing this is basically Go Hard. Go Hard would probably be kind of the strongest aspect of this, but if it's in a region that Go Hard might have a hard time in, maybe. I think this kind of design probably has to be in PNZ. This is a really cool card, or specifically the draw card from your deck. This is some of my favorite text I've ever seen. Like, this would help a lot of weaker strategies without it being like super oppressive or anything. Even like hell, man, even Victor, like if you want to just like meme around with stuff, even the fact that it makes your Victor champion spell a little bit better is nice, right? Like, that's fine, you know. Both me and Teal Red messed around with like running one of counterfeit copies or one or two counterfeit copies in like a Plaza Guardian deck. Teal Red loves Plaza Guardian shit. And it's like, that's probably the closest it's been to seeing play when you're just, you know, cycling like crazy and getting 0 mana plazas. But even then, it's not great if you can't, you know, draw them into your hand. Like, counterfeit copies just being basically 1 mana, do nothing until you might draw something later is really awkward. And it's a shame because it's a cool design. And it feels like it's sort of integral to PNZ's identity and what they're trying to do. And, you know, that sort of thing has never really worked. What are all these chip posts? All right, here we go. Last one, guys. This is it. Casino Defender. Synergy for Tom Rocca. A 3 mana 4/3. While I'm undamaged, I can't drop below 1 health or die. Oh. Wait. It's a very interesting concept. Isn't this Braum? Yeah, I'm guessing it's a Braum skin. It looks like one. So basically, to be able to kill this card, you have to damage it multiple times. Like, even without synergy points, if you deal it, you know, if you like Mystic Shot it, it doesn't kill it, right? Like, Mystic Shot will literally deal 1 damage to it. Until it gets damaged, you have to deal with 2 different damage instances to be able to kill it. And then if they heal it, then it's getting free value. That's a little spooky to me. It's a cool concept. Like, I like the card. Could be a good Taric card. Oh, that's really interesting. Taric Bilgewater? God, if only Bilgewater as a region literally had a single spell. Taric Bilgewater with that card could actually be super interesting. But yeah. As like a Taric buff target, it hits the right timing. It's like a 3 mana card. It's got like a really powerful ability. That could be really cool. Pocket Aces? True! I can clone Pocket Aces. So Splinter Soul would create a 1/1 Casino Defender. It wouldn't be damaged, and it would be completely immortal. Because it would be a 1/1 at its base stats. It would never be able to die. It's an immortal 1/1. I mean, the funny thing is, I mean, obviously that wouldn't be broken because it would just be a 1/1. That would be a cute thing to do. Yeah. You literally Splinter Soul this card. Like, I like effects like this. It has a hard time really being overpowered, especially with the region that it's in. But its effect just makes you think about the game in different ways, right? And so I love these kinds of custom cards that are introducing these kinds of new rules. If this was in most regions other than Bilgewater, this would be a completely different card, right?